Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Parish Catalyst webinar. I'm Johnp, Poitevent, and I am the Director of Parish Catalyst. And my co-host today is going to be Mayor Ernesto. Mayor is our Director of Pastoral Services. Say hey, Mayor.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
And Jen is with us. She's our Director of Communications. She's going to be working behind the scenes with you in our Q&A in the chat, posting some things for you up there. Before we get started, I just wanted to give some shout outs to some folks. We had over 250 of you register for this around the country and Canada, and a bunch of familiar faces and friends. Want to say hey to Basilica St. Mary in Minneapolis. Been working with them for a long time. Our Lady of Assumption in Ventura, Father Leon, American Martyrs, of course, in Manhattan Beach. I'll be with you for your staff retreat in just a few weeks. Retailer in Costa Mesa, Father John Henderson up in Tigard, Oregon. Tigard, or is it Tigard? I'm always getting that wrong. St. Pius in Billings, who's in our learning community now. And then a bunch of dioceses and archdioceses. Shout out to Austin. I'm coming to you from Dallas, so right here with you. And Wichita, Joliet, San Jose, Portland, Rochester, and then the Archdiocese of Chicago, Dubuque, LA, Newark, and St. Paul. So glad that you are joining us today. We just love seeing the church come together from all over the country. And today we're working on this idea of community outreach. This is an area that Mare and I have both had a lot of experience in, and we've talked about doing this webinar forever, right? Like for over a year probably. But the timing was just right. My ministry work really got to start in outreach, both globally and in the States. So I started out doing outreach in Haiti and Mexico, and leading teenagers on mission trips, and then also in New Orleans and around the country locally here. So Mare, tell us a little bit about your experience in this area of outreach.
Yeah, I was first involved in community outreach, probably going back over 20 years now, serving at a local soup kitchen while in college, directing community service and civic engagement offices when I worked in higher education, leading youth and young adults on countless service trips and watching transformation occur. And most recently, before joining the team here at Renew, I worked at a Catholic nonprofit, the Center for Faith Justice, that focused on providing these transformational experiences of service rooted in faith.
For the sake of this conversation, Mare, why don't you tell us what we mean when we're talking about community outreach?
Yeah, when we hear the word outreach, that could mean something different to different people. But for our conversation today, we're going to look at community outreach in terms of service with the community. And in most outreach experiences, you might even notice an intersection of some of the different ways that we might be thinking about what this word means to us.
So I think those of you that tuned in for this webinar knew probably what it means, but for those of you that are working in other areas of parish life and you just watch our webinars on a regular basis, we're talking about outreach, serving practical needs in the community around the parish, outside of the parish, the city that your parish is in. So if you've seen me before, you know that my favorite question is why. And so when we started working on this conversation about community outreach, I just thought it would be good to start with the foundation of why. Why is community outreach important? In the first half of the webinar, really, we're going to look at why this is important on many different levels. Because if we don't have that foundation and we're not inspired by why it's important, then everything else is just kind of work. But we want to find out why this is important to us, why it's important to God, why we should care about it. And I just want to start with the foundation that Scripture, from the beginning to the end, we see that this is important to God, for his people to be reaching out and caring for the needs of the people around them, not just within the family of God, but outside of the family of God too. I'll just give one reference from the Old Testament. We see a lot of commands for Israel in the Old Testament, a lot of them about caring for people. But this is a really interesting thing that's often overlooked. And it's the prophet Ezekiel speaking about Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, I don't have to explain to you what Sodom and Gomorrah are best known for. what we would see as their worst sins that they were judged for. But in Ezekiel 16:49, the prophet says, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy." I bet that's not what comes to mind when you think of Sodom. But that was so offensive to God, bigger than other things that Sodom is known for, that Ezekiel said that this was the sin of that city. That's pretty heavy. And that tells us that this is something we should really take great concern for, because it's that important to God. Now, Jesus, throughout his ministry, commands us to care for the poor and the needy, commands us to care for the people around us and their needs. One of the most famous parables of Jesus is the sheep and the goats. And in the sheep and the goats, there's these two groups of people that are defined as sheep and goats. And he says that the sheep are the people that care for the hungry and the thirsty and the stranger, the naked, the sick, those in prison. These are people on the margins, people that the successful parts of society don't really care for. And Jesus said the sheep, when they cared for these people, that they were doing it as unto Christ, that when they cared for the least of these, they did it for him. And that the goats, on the other hand, who didn't care about these people, well, I think you know how the story goes, but their future was not very bright. And it's very strong in its wording, but Jesus felt that strongly about caring for the needs of people around them. And then James in chapter 1 says the religion that our God and our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to care after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. That this is pure religion, to care for people in need. And then in chapter 2, James says that faith without works is dead. You can tell me all about your faith. You can tell me how devout you are. You can go to Mass 5 times a week. I don't think he really said go to Mass, but he says, if you do all that and you don't have works of faith, then it means nothing. So those are pretty strong, I would say, encouragements and even commands from Scripture about why we should care about meeting the needs of the community around us. But we didn't just see it in Scripture as a command, we also see it lived out by Christ, right?
Yeah, one example that stands out for me when I think about this is the woman at the well. For those who are familiar with that, the Samaritan woman representing the lowest of the low in her time. And instead of Jesus, when he meets her, judging her, he acknowledges her, but not just acknowledging her, provides her with a sense that she belongs and that she has worth. And ultimately that encounter, that experience that woman had with Jesus, it transformed her. It provided witness for her to share that led others to believe and encounter Jesus for themselves. And we see countless examples in Scripture where we see Jesus feeding the hungry, healing the sick, and really going out to the margins of that community where he ministered.
And then we see the church carry on those very works, right? I don't need to go into too much detail, but I think if you look at the history of the church, you're probably very familiar with how the church has been that organization that created orphanages, started soup kitchens, started hospitals, started homeless shelters, started schools to educate people and help lift them out of poverty. These are things that are a part of our history. It's who we are. It's our very DNA. And it's also something in the church teachings, right, Mare? The writings of the church speak very in great depth to this issue, right?
Yeah, and certainly we see it when we think about the corporal works of mercy and the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. When we talk about this in the trips that we do with youth as well, the list of 7, but we'll focus on 3 really today. And that's the call to family, community, and participation, the option for the poor and vulnerable, and solidarity.
Mare, what, in church teachings and writings, what has really stood out to you? Like, what are some things that have really impacted you, that really inspired your faith and your work in this area?
I think for me, that lens of solidarity, that shift in the mindset of I'm going to serve these other people, and really changing what I think when I go to do service. And I'm serving with and alongside. It's not me going to serve others, but rather serving alongside my brothers and sisters. We're all family, and that shift in mindset, that idea of solidarity, really brings a different perspective for me when I go out to serve with others.
Yeah, it's so important. I think later we're going to talk about some best practices in serving the needs of others. And I think you're alluding to it there, just this idea that it's not this hierarchy of we're the privileged people that are going to help those. Even that, I mean, I know it's a scriptural term, the least of these, but it can have this very, I think, demeaning kind of, in our language at least, demeaning kind of mindset, rather than we're brothers and sisters, you have a need I can help with, but we're equal, right? We're all in this same thing together.
Yeah, and what you learn from others when you have that mindset that you're not going in to provide a service to someone, but you go in with that open mind and open heart. I could probably do, a whole another hour talking about the lessons I've learned from serving in certain situations, and that I learned from the youth that are experiencing serving maybe for the first time.
I'm going to share a quick story, but we didn't discuss this, Mare, but I'm going to share a quick story about that because it was so profound for me. I worked with a church in South Florida, and we did this thing every year. We did a Super Bowl party for the homeless. And because the weather is so good there around Super Bowl time, like 1st of February, we had this outdoor amphitheater. We invited all the homeless of the city to come. We had a cookout, but we had barbers. We had people with hygiene kits. We had an organization that actually did testing for diseases for people that wanted, medical care. But one unique thing we did is we had a foot washing tent where they could come in, get their feet washed, get clean socks and shoes if they needed them. And this really large African-American man came in. I mean, he looked like he had played in the Super Bowl maybe. And he was getting his feet washed by this college student. And the picture was just beautiful. And the student washes his feet, puts clean socks on it. And the man says, okay, now it's your turn. And the kid goes, what? No, this is for you. And the guy goes, I read the Bible. You have to let me do this for you too. And so they traded spaces, and what that picture
That's
of like
beautiful.
solidarity, right? Isn't that beautiful? I can't imagine the impact that had on both of their lives. I hate to shift off of that, but one thing I want to also say about why this is important is that it is a normal part of being a disciple of Christ. When we talk about a dynamic discipleship at Parish Catalyst, we talk about these 5 characteristics of being a dynamic disciple: that a disciple believes, grows, gathers, loves, and leads. And loving means not just loving in your heart, but it means loving with your actions. It means living sacrificially for the sake of others. And if someone is not in some way living out this command of Christ to serve and help those in need, they are not being fully formed as a disciple. They're not living fully as a disciple. So when we don't emphasize the importance of this, and we don't engage our parishioners in this, we're actually denying them full faith formation as a person. And I think when you think about what faith formation has become in many areas of the church, where it's more of an intellectual endeavor, it's a learning, it's collecting information and knowing all the right answers, we miss how much this actual activity in doing this can impact people's lives. Just like that story of that college student, how that impacted his life. Mare and I have both worked a lot with youth and just seen it impact the lives of youth. We were remarking the other day about how we both have gotten letters from parents months later that ask, what did you do to my child? Like, they are not the same person they were whenever I sent them out to serve with you. Mare, you've seen some research on that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so where I worked before at the Center for Faith Justice, we had a research study over the last 20 years of youth that engaged in these service-based immersion experiences rooted in the Catholic faith. It's What Works research study, and capturing just really tangible experiences that these kids had, and not just the impact that the kids had, but what that change, that transformation that the child encountered on that experience did for their family. So as John mentioned, those calls and letters we would get from parents that would say, I don't know what happened, on this service trip, but my kid is asking different questions now. They're encouraging me to go out and serve in the community. And we see that when youth are engaged in their faith and through service, there is research now that shows they're more likely to continue their faith through adulthood, to continue to go to Mass, to continue to live out their faith, to say that that's important to them, that being Catholic means that they're going out and serving, that they're helping lighten the load for their brothers and sisters in their community or surrounding communities. So there's certainly research that will allude to the importance of the transformation these experiences can have, whether it's a one-time service experience or it's something that they're doing over a week in the summer. It works. It really does.
Yeah, Mare, that research that Faith Justice did is so important. And also there's research I want to point you towards by Diana Garland at Baylor University that was compiled into a book called Family Ministry, A Comprehensive Guide. Really, really encourage you. If you care about family faith formation, really encourage you to check that out. There's a link to it in the chat window right now. But in this research, she studied, the statistics we see are that 60% of all kids that grow up in the church leave and never come back. But she said, why don't we study that 40% that stay in the faith and find out what was different about their family faith experience. And what she found was one of the most common traits of families whose children stayed in the faith was that family served together somehow in outreach. Isn't that fascinating? That would not be our intuitive, instinctual idea about what keeps someone in the church. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they, with their physical hands, did something that was a display of their faith, a result of their faith, it further embedded it into their hearts. I think that there's that saying, like, teach me or tell me about something, and I may learn it or know it, but if I do it, then I understand it. And so check that out, Family Ministry, A Comprehensive Guide by Diana Garland, but also pass this on to those who work in family faith formation at your parish. Maybe that would be a great thing to incorporate into your family faith formation program, is ways for families to serve together in the community. Mare, tell us, we're going to watch a video of how this impacted someone's life. Tell us about Sean a little bit.
Yeah, so Sean, I got to know Sean through my previous role at CFJ at the Center for Faith Justice. Sean went to St. Joe's University. He'll share a little bit about his experience in this video, but Sean, after he graduated from college, he went on to be a youth minister at a parish just outside of Princeton. From that, he evolved in his career. He became an executive director for the Vincentian Center in New Jersey. And from there, he decided to elaborate the work he had been doing with his youth group at the parish just outside of Princeton, and really created this movement of the Center for Faith Justice, these works programs where he took high school students really to the Trenton area. For those that don't know the geography of New Jersey, it's all of maybe 15 minutes away from Princeton is Trenton, New Jersey, and just gave them that experience. And he saw that there was something special happening in those experiences. So he led the path for the Center for Faith Justice to be born. And so it has continued. Sean now works for CLA, Contemplative Leaders in Action, where he works, I think he's the director for leadership and young adult programs now, but he has had his own faith journey that you'll see a little bit in this testimonial that really started with his home life, and it carried through when he went to college.
All right, let's take a look at that now.
Service wasn't something you signed up for in my family. It wasn't something we did on special occasions. It was just what we did. We used to joke around that, other kids would be opening presents on Christmas morning, or, looking for Easter eggs on Easter morning, and we were at the soup kitchen serving, and then we got to go do those things. The seeds were kind of getting deeper and deeper, and the experience was becoming more important to me, so that when I went to college, I wanted to go to a place that talked about service and talked about justice. At that point in my life, even though I'd been very involved in youth ministry, I wasn't particularly passionate about the faith. I had a friend who was a couple years older, and she enlisted me in a particular service program where we would bring sandwiches and food to folks on the streets of Philadelphia at night. We would be bringing sandwiches and tea to people who suffered from profound poverty, often from mental illness, and lived in the streets. And some of these people became folks that I got to know well. And the end of my first semester came and went, and I remember coming back to Philadelphia, and I was downtown with some friends, and we were walking up Market Street, and we were making our way to the subway, and my friends were a few feet behind me, and I heard someone call my name. And I stopped and I looked around, and I assumed it was my friends, and they were talking to each other. But I keep walking, and I hear someone laugh and say, "Sean!" And I'm like, "What?" And I hear a voice say, "Look down here." There were some planters with shrubs, and there was a heating grate behind those shrubs. And right at that spot was one of the men that I had gotten to know as an acquaintance from the service I did. And I kind of laughed and said, "I didn't see you." And he said, "Well, don't you know? No one does." He was homeless largely because it's easy to deny his humanity. And the more I thought about that, the more those thoughts turned to prayers. And the prayers became, "Lord, let me see you in the face of the poor." I hadn't been to Mass in quite some time, and I remember coming back, and I went back the following Sunday, I sat there, and this happened for a couple weeks, and I had gotten to be friends with one of the Jesuit priests. I went and talked to him, and I said, "Look, I don't know what this spiritual direction thing is, and I'm having a really hard time connecting this to the sense of faith, the kernels of faith that I feel inside." He started introducing me to Catholic social thought, and I started reading the social encyclicals of the Church. When I read those, the whole thing opened up for me, and I started to understand how the sacraments and the service and justice and faith were all a seamless garment. I'm a big believer that it's hard to do work on behalf of those who are suffering the most for the long term if you don't have a strong spiritual life. I go to daily Mass and try and make that not only the source of my spiritual life, but of my activism and my advocacy. It's about recognizing that we're connected as children of one God, and that connection is exactly where we draw the source of our strength. That it's in the living God that we have this connection to all these people who are suffering.
That's great, and it's just so true. Anyone watching this that has been a part, they're engaged in serving and helping, knows it's transformational. And I think whenever we do re-engage in it, we always wonder why we don't do it more often, right? Like this should be a regular discipline, like once a week or a couple times a month. I want to share a couple more ideas about why this is important before we go into our second half, which is a little more practical ideas and practices. And one that is maybe uncomfortable to talk about, but is important to recognize, is that whenever I bring parish teams together, and whenever I work with parishes, a lot of times I'll throw out there and ask, what are some things the church at large is struggling with? And there is someone under 40, usually a millennial or young adult, that says, "We have a massive branding problem." And I know that's a very, very business-like way to frame it, but we have a bad reputation. There's a lot that's happened over especially the last 20 years, but even beyond that, right? Things that have cast a unfavorable or even negative light on the church and what the church means, what the church stands for. And I'm not just talking about doctrinal things. I'm talking about true things that have hurt people and damaged people. And in light of that, we could use any good press that we can get, anything that displays the heart of who we really are. and speaks to people, whether they are people of our faith or not. It speaks to them that we love and care for people. And outreach in the community is that very thing. It is good press. It not just for the sake of virtue signaling, it is good press because it says this is who we are and we're acting it out. We're living it out. We care about people outside of our doors, outside of our walls, outside of our faith. And there's a saying that good works lead to goodwill, which opens the door for the good news. And I want to encourage you to think about how we could be known as the best parish for the community, not just the best parish in the community. If we could be known as that place that community leaders, when they have a problem they're trying to resolve, they have a need, the first thing that comes to mind is your parish, a group of volunteers who are eager to serve in any way to help the needs of others. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing for your parish to be known for? And then I would also say, this kind of work connects with millennials. As I said earlier, this is a generation that puts a high value on purpose and living out purpose beyond their own life. There are many companies now that have put great emphasis on what they call a corporate social responsibility platform, which is how the corporation gives back to the community. And a lot of them offer paid volunteer hours for their employees because it's become so attractive to millennials to work for companies that do this. Well, is that something they see when they see your parish? Do they see an organization that has a sense of social responsibility to the community outside of their doors? And then lastly, utilize that opportunity to invite people outside of your parish to serve with you. If you already have things going on, whether it's Knights of Columbus or St. Vincent de Paul or a soup kitchen or a food pantry, are you posting that in the community bulletin board of opportunities to serve? I think that is such a great way to get people outside of your parish, working alongside of people inside of your parish where they might build some relationships. Any other thoughts on that, Mare, before we move on to the second half?
No, I think when we get into some of the details of how people can continue to grow their outreach, we'll have some new ideas.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, I want to give a little plug for Parish Catalyst, like I always do here in the middle. You're familiar with that probably. But a few things I want to put on your radar. One is, if you're new to our webinars, welcome. I hope you'll register for our webinar library. You can do that through the website. You can also do it through, you'll receive an email after this webinar that has the links to all these things that we've talked about, and you can register for it then as well. Secondly, want to make sure you know about our virtual learning communities. We have another one starting up in September, and this is where 6 or 7 parish leaders and their leadership teams come together virtually 4 times over 18 months. And each time we come together, we meet for a couple of days online, and we talk about what it means to be a disciple, how we are growing as disciples, and how we are going to grow disciples in our parishes. And we address a lot of the issues or the practices of parishes that thrive. And at the end of that time, you create a plan for the next 6 months on what need to be priorities for your parish to help creating more of a dynamic discipleship culture. So if you're looking for something to kickstart your parish, something to help you get unstuck, and if you might recognize the value of being in a cohort with parish leaders from around the country, you know, Mare and I just facilitated a 3-day cohort with the Archdiocese of Newark. And at the end, we asked people what was the most valuable thing for them. You know, we brought in these great speakers and teachers, and we put them through exercises. But the majority of them said the most valuable and important part for us was interacting with these other parish leaders and learning from each other and seeing that we're not alone in the struggles we're facing. So if that seems interesting to you, please check that out. There's a link in the chat on our virtual learning community. And then lastly, I just want to say, I just mentioned we just did a learning community with the Archdiocese of Newark. That's our second learning community we've started with them. And if you are a diocese or an archdiocese watching this, these diocesan-based learning communities, we do in person. 10 parishes from your diocese come together for a few days with their leadership teams. And it creates a synergy in the diocese of parishes that have a common vision for discipleship, and they're also growing together in relationships with each other. The DRE from this parish and that parish are learning from each other, and then they can meet outside of our gatherings. So if that seems like something that your diocese might be interested in, it's a parish innovation process. It's not super prescriptive. It's more about principles and process that we guide them through to help them discover their own plans for the future of their parish. But that's always built around this idea of making disciples. So check that out. All right, that's enough infomercial from me. Let's get to the second half of our webinar and look at the what and the how. We've talked about the why of community outreach. Let's talk about the what and the how and best practices. Before Mare shares a couple, I want to throw a book out to you that I encourage you to check out in a video series. The book is called When Helping Hurts, and the subtitle is How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor. The way that we do this community outreach is just as important as why we do it. And I think historically, we've done this at times with great intentions and a great heart, but the methods that we do it with are actually destructive to the dignity and the structures of the community that we're trying to help. So this book is an incredible resource for getting educated on how not to do that. And then there's also a video series called Restore, and it's 3 videos that are only 15 minutes each that are great for training volunteers and how to do healthy, holistic community outreach. And that link will be in the chat as well. The Restore videos, it's from a Protestant church called Life Church. Check those out. Mare, a best practice that you shared with me that I think is great is this idea of what you call preflection and reflection. Preflection and reflection. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I thought I had invented this new term called preflection, but then other people had used it as well. So I can't coin it, but I love this idea. So let's imagine, congratulations, your parish ministry is ready to plan their community outreach. How do you move that from being just an event or a program to a transformational experience? So yes, you want people to go out and to serve with their communities, but really important is to take time as a group to know who the folks are going to be that are joining you, and to, as I would say, reflect on that experience before it even happens. Talk about your expectations. What do you think you're going to see, hear while you're serving? Sharing your hopes and even your fears about what that experience might be. Think about how you might be challenged and even surprised through this particular community outreach. Will you be serving or working alongside people that you don't know, whether they're from your church or from the site where you're going to be doing service? And will this particular type of outreach be different for you? Perhaps you've always volunteered at a soup kitchen, but now you might be doing something where you're working or volunteering with a low-income school, and that's a change of pace for you. Maybe this is the first time you're actually in a person-facing role. Maybe up until now you volunteered at a food pantry and you haven't really had a chance to encounter the folks that you're serving alongside. Think about how that might be different from volunteering behind the scenes. And how might you be able to imagine this experience through, as I mentioned before, this lens of shared community? We think about solidarity. What does that mean? To go into this experience with a lens of shared community.
Mare, let me share one more question there too. Is you might help ask people to just reflect on what it might feel like to be on the receiving end of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's very important.
If someone were coming into my home and started cleaning it up or started telling me you need to get rid of this, you know, I've gone on these trips where we go help improve people's homes, and we start identifying things that we need to get rid of in their yard to help them. And think about how that might feel for you, or how would it feel for you if you had to come and bring your children to a soup kitchen because it's the only place they could get a meal. So as we put ourselves in the hearts and minds of the people that we're serving, we can also serve with a more empathetic outreach and just I think a more gentle kindness of heart in reaching out to people.
Yeah, that's such an important point to think about, that shared community, and you're entering someone else's home or their daily experience, and what does that mean to really put yourself in that person's lived experience? And that can be a challenge, but to take some time before you do that service to really think about what that would be like. And then we're going to fast forward just a little bit. You did it. Your community outreach experience just wrapped up, and you're going to talk about it. You're going to reflect now on that experience of what you did. But not just let's talk about what we did when we were serving, but where did you see God present? Did you think about seeing God present when you were serving? What challenged you and what surprised you? And what brought you joy? It's so important that we're joyful when we're doing some of these experiences as well, even when they're challenging, to bring joy to others. What are the names and the stories of personal encounter that you recall? That might be something to think about even before you go to do service, is being mindful of the names and the people and the stories that you're going to encounter. How do you share your witness of this experience with others who maybe weren't able to serve with you that day? And when you use that lens of a shared community while you were serving, how might your perspective have shifted? Were you able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to think about what that might have been like to be on the opposite side of when you were serving? I have one example that I would use with both youth and young adults that I actually learned myself when I was starting my own journey in some of these transformational experiences, and it's called River Stories. And you can personalize it however you see best fit. But the idea here is you're going to use images of a river. So imagine this river is your journey, your faith journey, your service journey, however it fits best into your experience. And think about images like rocks and trees, a sign for faith, hearts, hands to show relationship or where you've grown in love. And these community outreach experiences can often offer this new element for you in your own, we'll call it a river story, that can be especially important when you're engaging with young people, but even for yourself to reflect on and say, this rock kind of is a symbol of where I was challenged, something that I had to overcome on my own journey. And this tree or this flower symbolizes an area where I grew. If you have a symbol of hearts or hands, maybe that's a relationship that formed because of that journey you took through this outreach experience. I've seen this activity bring folks to tears, and really reflecting on what that experience meant to them and thinking about it a little differently, that I just went out and I did service and I feel so much better. But really what transformation happened for you and for the community where you were serving because of this example that you provided.
Yeah, I think this reflection piece is so important in all areas of serving. As we lead volunteers, reflection is where we help them connect their service with their faith, connect their service with God. The scripture says, serve as unto the Lord, not to man. It's the Lord Christ that you're serving. We can forget that sometimes when we're doing things. And this reflection piece, you can use this with any area of volunteer at your parish. It could be greeters. Hey, after Mass, come back together. Let's just circle up for a minute and say, where did you see Jesus today? Where did you see God working as you were greeting people today? You could do it with Knights of Columbus. You can do it with any type of ministry in your parish or service. Even people that are like Eucharistic ministers or liturgists afterwards, after the Mass. How did you encounter Christ today? And it helps them connect that service with their faith. I think it's the most important part of volunteer development, is helping them make that connection. Mare, let's talk about some actual ideas and practical ways that we can that parishes can serve the needs of the community around them. And I think you had a point as we were planning this that's so necessary, and that is to just not think that we are the first ones to ever have this idea. There's no one else in my community that's had an idea of helping the homeless, so I'm going to create a new ministry, right? What is the first thing that we should do when we have some sort of inkling as wanting to serve?
Yeah, I think it's important to find out what already exists. Check with existing outreach ministries in your parish or perhaps at neighboring parishes if you would like to work with them. To the point that John made, you want to be the best parish in the community versus the best parish for the community. You can do that by checking websites for your local town or your local community. And one thing I like to think about is actually thinking outside the normal, what I would call a giving calendar. So when we get around the holiday season, around Thanksgiving and Christmas, you'll see an uptick in food drives and the giving tree for Christmas time. But especially when it comes to things like food, people are still experiencing hunger when it's not Thanksgiving or Christmas. And when somebody said that to me when I was a young adult, that just sort of stuck with me, like, oh yeah, people are still hungry in March when it's not the holiday season.
If I could jump on that right now, I think it's perfect timing, because there's a lot of families whose kids rely on school lunch programs and breakfast programs to live.
Yeah.
And summertime is an incredibly great need, both for food pantries and for those families. So think about reaching out to those families in this season.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in my intro, I did work at the Trenton area soup kitchen when I was in college, and my own experience there, at Thanksgiving time, there was too much food to be able to give to the folks that were coming to the soup kitchen for their meals or for some supplemental items, and we would have to throw some items away, unfortunately, because there just was such a surplus. And then fast forward a few months, there was a dire need for the shelves to be filled again. So just being mindful that these are things you can do throughout the year that are very important. And yeah, definitely for kids this time of year, as school is winding down, if they're not going to some kind of a camp where they might be provided with some sort of a meal, to think about ways you can reach out to your local community and ask, what can we do to help? I think that's so important, that you don't have to go in with the solutions. You can actually ask people, what is it that is needed? What's your wish list? And nonprofits in your community, there's a good chance they even have a wish list posted right there on their website.
Yeah, and there may be ministries in your parish that are struggling, that that want to do good, but they've dwindled down to just a few people. Their efforts are much better used if they partnered with someone else who's doing it well. Mm-hmm. There's a church I worked with in Washington, and they had a struggling food pantry. It was struggling so badly that parishioners were not donating anymore, and the food pantry ministry was actually going and buying food from the grocery store and giving it away. It was cost prohibitive. It was not very effective. And there were several food pantries in the city, and they went to them and said, hey, we are thinking about shutting down our food pantry. What do you suggest? You know what they told them? Thank you. Thank you. Because we could make better use of your people's enthusiasm for this than you struggling over there. We actually need help up. This little community up the mountainside has no help at all. We need people to drive food. We have tons of food. We need people to deliver it to these little food pantries up on the hillside. Mm-hmm. Well, suddenly these people had a new mission. They were way more effective, and it just helped by them asking some questions of the community around them. Mm-hmm. Before we go further in this, I want to invite you to share your creative ideas for outreach in the Q&A. And also, if you have any questions for Mare and I as we wrap up here, put those in the Q&A, and we'd love to answer them. But also, we want to hear some creative ideas you have. We're going to share some others now. As Mare just mentioned, ask your city. Go to the city hall. Go to the Chamber of Commerce. Ask them, what are your needs? We want to help meet unmet needs in our city. What do you suggest? And I'll give you a few that I've seen. One is serving in schools. I've seen churches adopt a school. I've seen parishioners take on literacy programs and say, just come and read 1 hour a week with a group of students. And suddenly this parish is seen as this giving, serving, really asset to the community. Mm-hmm. A church here in Dallas that I served with, they went to the city and said, we want a list of anybody that has violation notices on their home. It needs to get painted. The yard needs to get mowed. We want to help those people out. Well, our city here in Dallas actually has a community advocate that is on staff with the city that they partnered us with. He provided all of the resources. We were painting this old man's home, and the city brought us the paint, the paintbrushes, everything. It was a budget zero activity. We brought the volunteers, and guess who got the credit? We did. And the old man in the home showed up to church Sunday morning just to see what this extraordinary place was where these kids came from. And he just wanted to say thank you. That's a win, right? Something we failed to mention earlier, this kind of work is evangelistic. Like it opens people's hearts to the church. And then last one I'm thinking of here is St. Lawrence of Brindisi, Father Matt Elshoff in Compton. They've partnered with the city of Los Angeles to do food distribution, and the city provides all the food. All the parish has to provide is volunteers, and cars line up once a week, and they load the food into the cars. And guess what they think? They think, wow, that parish, what an extraordinary place, right? So, and then last thing that they do at St. Lawrence of Brindisi, Father Matt, I don't know if it's weekly or monthly, he has something called the Police and the Padre. And he and a police officer meet in a parking lot across the street from the parish, and people are invited to come for free confidential advice, either spiritually or legally, from the police and the Padre. And it's seen as just a great community outreach experience, because people see both the church and the police in a different light as they're there to just benevolently help people any way that they can. Let's see. Oh, I've got a couple more here. Sorry, Mare. I'm going to let you talk in just a minute. I just seen some great ones. St. Monica's in Santa Monica, you probably hear us mention them a lot. They have their feast days every year, and it's their big event, right? You probably have a feast day for your parish or a carnival. They said, we want to make this really represent dynamic discipleship. So on Saturday of their feast day weekend, they had a Saturday serve where they had 5 or 6 service opportunities throughout the city. People met at the parish, went out and served, and then came back later in the day to talk about what they'd done and share stories. Mm-hmm. So that took their feast day and actually made it something that's impacting the community around them. And then lastly, this will be lastly for me, I promise. This Protestant church down in South Florida, Christ Fellowship, during the recession of 2008, when it hit Florida especially so hard, nobody could afford to go to summer camp. People couldn't afford to send their kids to summer camp. So they said, what if we take summer camp and we kind of turn it upside down? And what if instead of going to camp somewhere, we turn it into a 1-week serve mission in our city? So for 1 week, those kids went out and served all day. And then at night, they had times of worship and sharing testimonials of what they'd experienced and seen. What's interesting is when the economy swung back up, they reevaluated this idea of doing camp again. And the kids said, we don't want to do it. We want to keep doing serve week. We don't want to ever do camp again. And so I just thought that's such a cool, creative way to get people involved, but look at the impact that it had on the kids' lives. So Mare, tell us more about your experience with youth and young adults.
Yeah, I've got 2 examples that I can share. I only chose 2. I've got plenty, 2 that I'll share. One, as I mentioned before, I used to work in higher education and many hats, but some of my favorite ones included the opportunities to work in the civic engagement, service, and social justice areas, and to walk with young adults as they're preparing to graduate and move on to whatever life might have next for them. So I'll share the story of TJ. He was one of my service coordinators, which meant he had a work study experience where he was working out in the community. And as a young adult in college, TJ volunteered every Saturday morning, not as a part of his work study, just of his own, to make sandwiches at a local Catholic church near our campus. He went on Habitat for Humanity trips with me that I led every year during college when they had spring breaks. And in his final year, he was an architecture major, so he had a 5-year commitment to his schooling. He was trying to think about what to do when he graduated. Was he going to take a more traditional route and work with an architecture firm or something that had really been on his heart was to take time and work in something that gave him more joy. And that's what he chose. So after some conversations with him about how to navigate that next step, he decided to forego that traditional route after he graduated, and he went to work with one of the Philadelphia chapters of Habitat for Humanity. And fast forward, TJ is now in Africa, and he's doing work in Africa where he's helping build communities there, but rooted in his faith, his upbringing, these experiences that he had of service. And then one of my favorite examples from when I worked at the Center for Faith Justice, going back to some of those phone calls we would get about the transformation that kids had and parents weren't quite ready to deal with once their children were back, was a mom who called me probably in September, and her daughter had gone through one of our middle school programs that summer. And for our middle school programs, we would switch out where the kids went every day. So they had a different kind of service experience because something is going to stick differently for different kids. So one particular place they volunteered was a community food bank. So the mom called. She wanted to know a little bit more information about where her child had served, because she had this grand birthday planned for her 12th birthday party in September, October, but she didn't want to do that anymore. She said, "Mom, I don't want my birthday party anymore." And her mom was sort of floored. She said, "My daughter wants all of her friends to go volunteer, and I don't know where to begin. Can you give me some guidance?" So I pointed her in the right direction for the folks you need to talk to at the community food bank. And then if that weren't enough, her daughter said, "I also don't want presents, Mom. Tell my friends I don't want presents. But when I was at this service place, the lady told us something about like a birthday in a box, because Mom, did you know some kids, they can't have birthday parties?" She just had this experience where at 11 years old at the time, she was learning that not every child was able to have a birthday party. So she said, I want my friends to go on the website. I want them to look at the birthday in a box. And I want them to go to the party store and pick out like their favorite color, their favorite character, and do a birthday in a box. So when they come to volunteer that day, they're bringing their birthday in a box instead of a present for me. And that's what they did for her birthday, because of this one-time experience that also transformed her mom and raised awareness to, I'm sure, the other children's parents as well, who were dropping their children off at the community food bank, who may have even stayed and volunteered themselves. But these really can be transformational experiences. And I'd love to know where she is today, but that's the knowledge I have about just that one small impact, that really has that ripple effect, and showed that it was transformational for these people, these young adults, these kids.
That's so great. And like you said, you and I could probably sit here and tell story after story after story of people's lives we've seen impacted by this. There's not a lot of things that you can do that with.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for ways to revitalize your parish, to engage young people, young adults, young families, millennials, I would say this is probably your best bet. And I encourage you to get them involved in planning it, get them involved in finding out what the needs are in the community around them. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about this area of doing this in ways that are healthy and helpful and not demeaning or destructive, they care about that. That's something that's really important to them. So I would just really encourage you to do that. Mare, I'm going to direct you towards Mare for future questions about this. I know she would love to help. And so her email is going to be in the email going out after this. We don't have any questions as of yet. We'll give you one last second if anybody wants to post any questions or outreach ideas of what you're doing. But Mare, any closing thoughts that you have for parish leaders out there that are just interested in how this can have a bigger impact on their parish?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for joining us. It's so important to take that step to learn more about things that have been happening, maybe get some new ideas about ways that you can grow this type of ministry at your parish. But really, I think really important is to find out what is needed in your community, and to know that there are plenty of resources, whether it's parishes nearby or your local community, your local town, to reach out to folks there who will be so happy to get your phone call where you're asking them, what is it that we can do to serve with your community, rather than we just did a clothing drive, and where do we drop off the clothing that may or may not even be needed? So just to keep that in mind, I think is really important to know that there's a lot of folks that are wanting to work with you to create some of these wonderful experiences.
That's great. That's great. I'll just leave you with that reminder that good works create goodwill, which opens the door and opens hearts to the good news. So email us. We would love to hear about your good works that you're doing. Our email addresses will be in the follow-up that goes to you after this webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and hope you'll join us again next month. God bless.